You know, we hear about things like industrial policy all the time. Tariffs, government grants, big bailouts. But have you ever stopped to wonder how the government actually decides who gets that help? Why does one industry get a lifeline while another one is just left to fend for itself? Well, it turns out the answer has a lot less to do with economics than you might think, and a whole lot more to do with pure political power.
And that's the big question, right? On the surface, you'd probably assume these decisions are based on cold, hard economics. You know, which industries are most vital, which ones are struggling the most, or which have the biggest potential for growth. But a couple of researchers, Roberto Samanigo and Naixin Zhang, they suspected something else was going on behind the scenes.
And here's their big idea. The real driver isn't just about economic need, it's about political clout. And more specifically, it's about where an industry's jobs are located and just how much power the politicians representing those locations really have. It's a really powerful idea, and it's fascinating when you start to unpack it. So how do you even begin to prove something like that? Well, the researchers started looking for clues, kind of like detectives. And their first stop was the calendar. See, if it's all about economics, then the timing of these policies should be pretty random, right? It should be tied to things like recessions or market shocks. But if it's about politics, well, you'd expect to see a totally different kind of pattern.
And boy, did they find a pattern. It's actually pretty striking. The number of these trade policy announcements, it's not random at all. It spikes, and I mean dramatically, right around federal election years. Just look at 2012, 2016, 2020. It's plain as day. And that massive peak back in 2010, it lines up almost perfectly with the Citizens United ruling, which, as you know, completely changed the game for money and politics. This isn't a coincidence. It's a huge clue that political incentives are a major force here.
Okay, so if political power is the key, how do you even measure that? It feels so abstract, right? This is where the research gets really brilliant. The team developed this incredible new tool to turn that fuzzy concept of clout into a hard number you can actually track.
They call it political power exposure, or PPE for short. And the idea is actually simple but incredibly powerful. It's a score for every single industry that tells you how much of its workforce is based in districts represented by really powerful people. We're talking members of the majority party, key committee leaders, that kind of thing.
So here's how they did it. First up, they mapped out where every industry's jobs are, district by district, all across the country. Then they gave each representative in Congress a power rating. Are they in the majority party? Are they aligned with the president? And then finally, they crunched the numbers to create a weighted score. So an industry with tons of jobs in a district represented by a powerful politician gets a high PPE score. An industry concentrated in districts with less powerful reps gets a low score. Pretty clever, right?
So, now they've got this amazing tool. They could finally put their big hypothesis to the test. Is there a direct, measurable link between an industry's PPE score and how much government protection it gets? Well, the results are pretty staggering. What they found is incredible. Just a one standard deviation jump in an industry's political power score, its PPE, makes it up to 16% more likely to get any kind of policy support at all. A higher score literally opens the door to government help.
But wait, it gets even more dramatic. That same increase in political power doesn't just open the door, it can boost the number of protective policies an industry gets by nearly double. We're talking up to 98%. So it's not just about getting help, it's about getting a ton of help.
And it turns out not all policies are created equal in this game. The tools that are most sensitive to political power are the ones that are highly discretionary and directly move money and resources around. So things like tariffs, direct grants, and state loans, they are super responsive to an industry's PPE score. But broader policies like tax measures or technical standards, not so much. It seems like politicians prefer the tools where they can point and say, hey, I did that.
So this brings us to the next really logical question. Why? Why does this happen? What's the real motive for a politician to use their power this way? Well, the research points to two main channels of influence. On one hand, you've got what they call the local jobs channel. This is the classic story, right? Politicians protect the big local employers to keep voters happy and, of course, win their votes come election time. But on the other hand, there's the campaign finance channel. This is where politicians help out major campaign donors to secure the funding they need to win re-election. It's really the difference between winning with votes and winning with money.
Now, you might think politicians would just use both channels at once, double down. But here's where the data shows a fascinating twist. The two channels seem to act as substitutes for each other. If an industry has a ton of voter power because it employs half the town, it doesn't really need to spend as much on campaign donations. And conversely, if it's a huge donor, it can get that protection even without being a massive local employer.
So, we know the what and the why, but what about the who? Are some politicians better at playing this game than others? The research dug into this as well, and they actually created a profile of the most effective power players.
And a very clear picture emerges from the data. On average, Democrats are shown to be more effective at translating their power into a higher volume of these policies. No surprise, members of powerful economic committees, think Ways and Means or the Finance Committee, they have a huge impact. But the most motivated players? It's the legislators in those really competitive swing districts. The pressure of a tight election is, apparently, a very powerful incentive to deliver for your home industries.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. We've seen how geography, power, jobs, and money all intersect in this really complex way. But what's the big picture here? Why does understanding this system really matter for all of us?
Here's the bottom line. The policies that shape our economy aren't just objective, calculated responses to market failures. They are, to a very significant degree, the result of a system that actively rewards industries simply for being geographically aligned with political power. In short, protection flows to the powerful.
And don't just take my word for it. As the researchers themselves put it, this whole study just underscores how political representation directly shapes economic outcomes. It means that political power isn't some sideshow to the economy, it's a central force in deciding which industries get a boost and which ones get left behind.
And that leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought to chew on. If an industry's fate is tied so closely to the political map, it really forces us to ask a fundamental question. Is the real purpose of these policies to build a stronger, healthier economy for everyone, or is it just a tool for political survival? Something to think about.